everyone. Welcome back to Practically Intelligent. As always, I'm your host, Sanan Ozdemir, and with me, as always, is the lovely Akshay Bhushan. Hey, Akshay.
Hey, Snan. Pretty excited for today. We have our friend Katelyn Donnelly coming on. Katelyn is the founder and managing director at Avalanche VC, which invests in early stage ed tech and AI companies. Prior to that, she was co-founder of Delivery Associates, which did consulting with large government organizations to drive societal impact. Katelyn's an expert on all things ed tech, and it's a little different. You know, we're very practical here on what you can take, et cetera, but I think specifically in consumer education technology, it'll be really cool to see what Katelyn has to say on the impact that AI is having in the classroom on reskilling and just how we learn in general. And was excited to hear what she had to say across the spectrum here. So let's dive in.
Let's do it.
Katelyn, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
I wanted to take a quote you said a couple of weeks ago when we met, which was, the best consumer technology is learning technology. Talk a little bit more about that and what you meant by that.
Well, the other quote that I usually say that goes alongside it was, the largest university in the world is YouTube. And so people always want to build like the YouTube for learning or the TikTok for learning. But the reality is that like that consumer technology is like the best learning technology out there. And like another example of that might be, I mean, it's just, I've had like another example at the top of my head of like one of these big ones. Oh, like obviously OpenAI or like Perplexity, like all of these like AI tools that are machine intelligence are alongside human intelligence to amplify it. And so to the extent that people are working with those tools, they're learning and cognitively developing in important ways. So to the extent that all technology is a tool, that makes people more effective, more productive, and learning more. The best consumer technology is all learning technology.
And I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, if you think about just humans getting together on the internet, one of the more base instincts is to share information, right? You know, some of my favorite, kind of to your point, frankly, some of my favorite TikTok content is watching someone teach me about woodworking, and I have absolutely no intention of actually performing any woodworking. But the idea of learning about what they're doing really excites me because I get to walk away with some new piece of information. Now, that kind of leads me to one of my something we were talking about earlier as well, Katelyn, is this kind of distinction between learning something and what you might consider more structured education. Because I think when we talk about ed tech, obviously the ed is for education, but there really is this difference between kind of a formal, structured, just what you would consider education and, you know, what you might kind of consider just learning something new. Can you walk us through how you think about those two concepts?
Yeah. Well, when people usually say education, they think the education system, and there's very much, you know, this like formalized system, both culturally and then, you know, from the government of, you go to pre-K or pre-kindergarten, kindergarten, you know, up to primary, secondary school, then you go onto higher ed, and then you go into a job, and you might have corporate provided learning or workforce development, and it kind of like sees you through pre-K to gray education technology. And that system has a lot of tech, like in a vertical SaaS sense, that gets it to operate. In like, you know, in the whole spectrum from like courseware to enrollment software to, you know, school choice apparatus. And like, there's a huge like market and industry there in many billion-dollar companies. But then sometimes that overlaps with the learning, the teaching and learning in terms of curriculum products or learning management systems that sell into those big institutions. But learning itself doesn't need to necessarily, and often doesn't always happen inside of a classroom, and it often happens outside of a classroom, whether it's like through your parents or peers or informally on YouTube. And so there's some overlap between ed tech and learning tech, but there are also two very distinct categories as well.
Well, let's start to break down what those technologies are, because I mean, as someone, as our listeners know, I have been teaching in some capacity for over a decade, and I've taught both structured university classes as a lecturer at Johns Hopkins, and I've also taught things like General Assembly, which still was a structured course. But I also make content on the internet where people can just stumble upon and hear me give my relatively raw, unfiltered comments on reinforcement learning. And those are all, it's all me. And in a lot of ways, I'm not really acting much different, but I am aware of my audience and how my audience is different. So as a teacher, I can feel the difference between, again, call it a classroom structured education, and me just teaching my friend something over drinks that they asked me about. And I can feel that different. How does the technology differ, or how should it be thought about and differed in those two pieces, or in those multi-context of learning out there?
Well, when you are going direct to learner, there's a intimate relationship between the learner and the content deliverer, or whoever it is that they're learning from, and you have to really earn your right to that person's attention, right? Because like you have to keep them engaged, you have to keep them interested, because on the internet there's lots of other places they can go, and if they're not interested and engaged, they're going to go someplace else fast. Versus education systems or formalized schools, you have a very captive audience, and then the actual like learning and curriculum tools are often sometimes they are from, like, the buyer is the teacher, but often it's like the bigger institution, right? Like a math curriculum might be bought by, might have to go through a big procurement process, and like the school board, and then the teachers are really like implementing it. And so you begin to get farther away from the learner as a consumer, and more as like the learner is going through a education, like a fully bundled education system that includes many different parts. And a lot of the choices of the technology and products that they consume are supporting a agenda that is beyond just like keeping their attention. And sometimes that's good. So like, for example, one of our most successful portfolio companies at Avalanche is a company called Prisms of Reality. And they are a math and science learning company in VR. And they sell, and it's like a brilliant curriculum. They, each module places kids in some sort of role, like you are a scientist, and there's been an outbreak of Ebola. You need to tell the hospital like how many cases they can expect in a week's time, and that's exponential equations. And they sell exclusively B2B to schools, even though it's like consumer grade technology. And it makes it so that like they built into that curriculum is a lot of teacher dashboards that make it easy for teachers to manage a classroom, to know who's succeeding, who's going in advance, and who's like maybe struggling a little bit, so that they can tailor their instruction and help to different students who are progressing at different paces.
It increasingly feels like that unstructured learning that you and Sinan talked about, that unbundling is ripe for consumer technology disruption, especially with this new form factor of prompting and LLMs, or even multimodal AI. Are there examples you can think of in that direct to learning context? When YouTube came out, and no one thought of it as an education technology, but it's become one. And so, continuing on that trend of unstructured direct to learning examples, are there lesser known examples probably out there, but you're aware of, that have changed that learning paradigm, especially since the advent of LLMs? Are there demos or products you've seen that really excite you or you view as revolutionary?
I think the one people get really excited about is sort of in the vein. I mean, the largest, most successful purely ed tech consumer company today is Duolingo. And so language learning is definitely an area where AI generated content and interactions really help students and learners learn. And so there's a company like Speak AI that is, allows you to practice your speaking and get real-time feedback to learn a new language. And I think you speak to an avatar. And that was like an investment, one of the earliest investments that OpenAI did. So that's one. And I think the more that you get those sort of nudges, the more like those are sort of the learning in the flow of work might be like another one to think about. So like I think of Figma as like a learning company. Like Figma is now very much intertwined with the job of being a UX designer. Like it's a tool that you have to use if you're going to be in that profession seriously. And they had a sort of academy or a bunch of modules that are built into the product that get people to learn how to get the most out of the tool.
And I think that's a really good point. I think the idea of simulation through an AI, immersion, I think is the term that a lot of people would think about. Like, oh, like my dad would always tell me that he learned English by watching Sesame Street when he was in college because he was trying to learn English as an immigrant. And he always said, like, this is immersion. You just got to listen. You got to talk. You just got to try and fail. And someone's going to tell you, hey, it's actually this way. And then you say, oh, okay, I'll do it right next time. And that kind of, to your point, that kind of automation, like Duolingo, they do have those speaking sessions where you say something and they'll correct you. And it sounds like it's very similar with Speak AI. When it comes to those simulations, would you also say that outside of the simulation, for example, for me, I use one of my main use cases of AI, and I say this a lot, is frankly to help me code. Now, I say that as a broad category because on one hand, I've been coding for a decade, so that sounds weird. But on the other hand, it not only makes me faster at coding, sometimes even when I absolutely know what the next couple of lines of code are going to be, I will still prompt to say, hey, can you make a function that does X, Y, and Z? Because frankly, I'm just curious to see, are you going to do it the same way I would have done it? Mm-hmm. And will I learn something new by letting the AI attempt to be at least more optimized than me? Because I'm someone who never got a formal, here's the word, the terminologies come back. I never got a formal education in computer science. I don't have a major or any kind of graduate degree in computer science. It's all in mathematics. So when I learned how to code, I learned by going to YouTube, by trying and failing to code and figuring it out along the way. I would hire like contractors who are coders and say, I don't actually want you to code. I want you to teach me how to code. And they go, oh, okay, that's a weird ask. But now I kind of treat AI like that and say, hey, I need to write, I don't know, Kubernetes YAML file. And I kind of know what's supposed to go in it, but I'm going to let you do it so I can read the best way, or what you think at least is the best way to do it. So outside of simulations, it's just people are using AI and LLMs and some kind of machine learning systems to say, look, I kind of get the gist of what's happening here, but it's just helpful to watch someone do it. And I think that a lot of it comes back to learning styles, right? If you're a kinesthetic learner, meaning you need to do things and try and fail and repeat, and AI could help you in that sense. But for a lot of the visual learners, an AI is kind of golden to say, I just kind of want to watch you do it, and then I will be able to replicate that really well. And now the auditory learners are getting the voice AI. Like, is that kind of?
Can I tell you something?
Yeah, please.
That's actually been totally debunked.
Oh,
like people are not visual learners, auditory learners, or hands-on learners. It's just like those are all tools in a pedagogical system. So it's usually like, you watch me do it, then you do it, then you teach someone to do it, like in a sequence, like I do, you do, we do, or was it I do, we do, you do? But like that's one of those things in that has kind of been debunked. Is like there's no such thing as like some people are visual, some people are auditory. It's like it's not a relevant pedagogy.
Well, even better, because then I guess in that new way of thinking, or the correct way of thinking, let's say, can AI and LLMs still match that you do, we do, or I already forgot what it was. I do, we do, you do. Can an AI inject itself into that process and help that learning process along, or are we still not really at a point where an AI can really assist in that pedagogical system?
But I think you just said that that it's already doing it.
I thought it was, and then you told me it was debunked. So now I'm trying to figure out where
I would say the thing that's debunked is like the idea that there's a difference between being a like an experiential learner versus like a visual learner. Like it's it's not like what you were calling a visual learner, like you watching the AI do it. It's just like one step of the pedagogical process. But no, I mean, like it obviously AI is very helpful to like show you what it is that it's doing. I think one of the things that it is incumbent upon people is to know how to be a good learner, to learn how to learn. And you're probably a really good learner. And not everyone is like a good learner. They might not be patient. They may not be paying attention. They may not be like engaged. Like, so that's one of the sort of like bifurcations of like all education or like learning technology is like people who are motivated, who are like, who know how to learn, who are patient and will like take the time, can learn like an infinite amount using AI. The people that are really struggling, that like are struggling to read or struggling to do basic math, usually have like emotional hangups or like something else kind of like going on that make it difficult for them to learn.
Makes sense.
So that form factor you talked about, there's a couple of interesting words you use that I wanted to focus on, which is things like simulation, nudges, different form factors that I don't think anyone would necessarily use the word simulation, for example, in the context of learning a new language, unless in the context of the past 2 years. So maybe kind of focusing on that, are there particular things you're seeing? It makes sense, right, that what you talked about is that it's going to be increasingly accessible for motivated learners, whether in Bangladesh or Boston, to be able to figure out how to accelerate their learning. Sinan will be able to learn new languages, et cetera, stuff like that. But for the average student, and maybe education is broad, obviously learning is broad, but for the average student who is less motivated, what sorts of products or innovation can we expect for the kind of the bottom 3 quartiles of learning? Are there new products that you find interesting that are not just for motivated learners, but also just changing, using those nudges to make learning more accessible and democratized?
Well, that it's always like a bit. I mean, learning is always very accessible. I think it's always very accessible. Like it doesn't really matter what economic barrier, and it's like that's why immigrants come to America, and they might arrive like penniless, but they can do incredibly well because they're highly motivated and ambitious and believe that like they can take advantage of the systems to be able to be successful. And so like there's usually these like other things that kind of hold people back that are not just the like learning. I think one of the key things though that like people are beginning to change with the education system, and this gets to the sort of like how learning is eating education, is they like everyone's born curious and like creative. Like you learn, like you watch babies and learn, and they're doing the scientific method, and so it's like in human nature to want to learn and be curious and creative, and that often can get like stamped out partially because people are being forced to do things that like they might not be interested in, or they don't know why they should be interested in them, or they don't see the like relevancy, or they don't fully have like the opportunity like presented to them in the right way. And I think that the systems are going to get better at having the funding following the student instead of following the system, so that will allow the students to be able to be more interest oriented rather than having it felt like, oh, I have to learn this. It's a chore.
It seems increasingly accelerating this trend away from a fixed curriculum and form factored to increasingly personalized. That's definitely getting accelerated. It's really exciting, right? Like if you're not necessarily exposed or, have your immigrant parents telling you to do math, you might have an algorithm, et cetera, stuff like that to sort of surface that for you or nudge you in a certain way to topics that you also find yourself self-motivated to learn in that coincide with that.
And
Based off of all you're talking about, is there a specific area of, when you look at, it could be K to 12, it could be, university learning, it could be adult learning. Is there a specific area where in the next 5 to 6 years you expect to see the most impact from the kind of growth of these new consumer technologies like LLMs, et cetera? Is there an area you're seeing the most impact already on learners?
I mean, I think it's everywhere. It's just in the water. Yeah, I mean, the thing that AI or like generative AI does particularly well is it makes content generation very like quick and easy and cheaper than it was before. Like Pearson they used to hire teachers over the summer to do question banks for their tests. And now I'm pretty sure you could like with a couple buttons generate like high quality question banks for like a test and personalize it like very easily. And so like you don't need to hire people to do that anymore. And so I think that means that frees up people to spend more time on the human element of learning and less time on the like administrative, like, oh, I need to create content, then I need to do this assessment, now I need to grade the assessment. Like all of those sorts of systems that can be automated away and put into the background probably will be.
Yeah, I mean, I can personally attest to some of that. In some of my most recent books, I also write like quizzes for some of the sections, and frankly, I'll write. I write for Pearson. I'll write. They want 10 questions, let's say. I'll write 3, and I'll give those 3 to an AI, and I'll also give the relevant content and say, can you suggest 7 more? And then, frankly, I will usually have to tweak most of them in some small way just to kind of get it in my style and my voice, or maybe sometimes it's a little bit wrong and just like a nuanced way that I didn't want to confuse the student. But for the most part, to your point, that saves me a lot of time. It saves me the time. And frankly, it focuses my brain on more, how do I turn this into a quiz? How do I turn this into a instructor's manual or something like that? I can focus on the actual content and make the content as high quality as possible. And as most people who've interacted with an AI know, the higher content quality you put into the system, the higher content quality you get out of the system. You can rephrase that into a more well-known phrase with some expletives, but the concept still stands. The better content you put in, the better content you're going to get out. And I think, again, just literally speaking from experience, that kind of help from a teaching standpoint really does give me more time to keep thinking about the content for my actual students. Can I flip that question that actually meant a little bit more and say, are there areas where people are maybe not necessarily forcing, but attempting to use generative AI, LLMs in some capacity, and maybe the bet didn't pan out as much as they thought it might in terms of learning and education? Like, is there a type of technology that people thought AI would be great at this for education and learning, but didn't seem to be quite there yet?
Well, I mean, so much of like AI tooling, if you look at the ones that have taken off, are homework cheaters, like, oh, okay, I want this homework question answered. Like, I want that, like, I want to have this paper written for me so that I can like submit it and not do like the work for it. I don't really I don't think that that's necessarily bad. Like, I don't have a moral judgment on that, because I think that the system or the teacher should find a way to get students to want to do the work, or see why they would want to do it anyway, have that like real motivation and engagement factor. But I mean, that's when it doesn't work in terms of producing outcomes, is when it's like helping you just like cheat or fill in the answers, get through some task that you didn't want to do, that you didn't think was important. Yeah.
And obviously the whole cheating question is a big one that comes up in learning and education. A lot of people will use the analogy to the calculator to say, well, teachers used to not want calculators in class, and now we have one in our pocket at all times. So, well, that same device also has AI enabled on it. So, to your point, I will also come into that saying the moral judgment is not as important to me as personally what you said, which is, look, if my students want to cheat at the work I'm giving them, it is in a large part also a failure on me to not be saying, look, you are welcome to go home and look this up. And, the coding questions I'm giving you are, I'm not the first person to ask those questions. You don't even need an AI to cheat at this, quite frankly. But a lot of it, you're right, is on me to kind of motivate you to want to actually try to solve this. And I think a lot of that comes down to, not all of it, but a lot of it comes to personalization, where I also see AI, we've talked about this already, where AI being a big help here. One of the big questions I always tell, my friends who want to get into teaching is know your audience, whether they're children or adults. Who are you speaking to? Are you speaking to people who are really interested in math, computer science? Do they want to be there? In what capacity do they want to be there? And what are they trying to get out of this? What's the finish line for your students? Not for you, for your students. And the same content can be tailored towards multiple use cases, but it's going to be on you, the teacher, to know what use cases your students actually care about and actually try to personalize it. And I think AI can be a really big help there. Have you seen kind of more productized versions of these kinds of educational tools and functions out there? Or do you think people can just do that on their own with AI, Claude, and Chat GPT out there as it is?
Do what?
The personalization, right? Like if I give a student a coding question, is it worth giving the advice to the student to say, hey, give that same question to Chat GPT, not to get the answer per se, but to ask the AI, what's the point of this? Like when would I use something like this? Almost like using the AI as a TA/validator of the homework itself. Do you see that as a valid use? Because I've had students do that to me, quite frankly. They said, I asked an AI for a question that you gave us as homework, and the AI gave me like 10 different applications of that coding question. And I only cared about 2 of those. So like they literally said to me, you should include those in your next iteration of this class. And then I had to say, well, maybe not everyone thinks that, and there's different ways to personalize this. So what do you think about that interaction? I guess I'm curious.
Well, I always think people have always been obsessed with this idea of personalized learning. That was always the dream of the software. I've never been totally convinced that that's very important, because every person is personalized. So you can see the way information comes in, just like your student, then they personalized it for themselves and then gave you an answer that was individual to them, right? Like the technology doesn't need to be so personalized when the person itself is the Y factor or whatever. So I don't know. I think people overly obsess about it, to be honest. Like whether the content is perfectly you're like, okay, if you had some course and it was absolutely perfectly hit your interests, is it really going to make you way more interested in computer science? Maybe, I don't know. I just don't think that's a needle mover as much as people think that it is. There's other things that are higher quality that might move the needle, like playing games. So for example, I love this game Factorio, where you build a factory in an alien planet in order to launch a rocket off.
I think I saw this on Steam, actually.
Yeah, it's amazing. Toby from Shopify loves it. You can expense a Factorio because you're building all these supply chains. And we have a company called Recess, where homeschoolers work together to play interactively on Factorio. And you can imagine, there's all these different materials that go into making the rocket, and you build machines in factories and supply chains, and there's different ratios of inputs to outputs. But that sort of you're in a flow state, a gamified flow state, where you're learning about how to manage production at scale. Those sorts of things I'm like more excited about. And I think to the extent that AI can like make it easier for a smaller team to be able to code up and maintain and generate more excitement for like a gamified world, like that's really exciting.
Yeah, I love that.
One thing you've kind of touched on is when you talk about the gamification, one example you used was Figma. And then before recording, you even said Nooks is a learning product,
Yeah.
which is a total portfolio company in sales AI. It does feel like, yeah, the old YouTube or forms of software where you'd go in, it's like a book, you'd pick it up and learn it down. And now there's a lot of more immersive in gamification. And the interaction between labor and learning and the AI is all of this um, complementary sort of loop. And so I'd love to hear what you mean by like thinking of like companies like Figma and Nooks as learning companies, and then maybe opportunities for software itself to be kind of to make us all gamified learners.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Nooks I thought was just brilliant. So my sister was a senior director of sales development at a tech startup, and she was using Nooks. And like first, me and my husband, like I'd never been an SDR before, and we were on Nooks basically doing a practice conversation with a potential outbound client because we wanted to see who would do the best in terms of like getting that person to schedule a follow-up meeting or whatever. And so yeah, it was like a simulation. And then the other thing my sister showed me, which I thought was also great pedagogy, is like there's a virtual sales floor, and she could like listen into anyone's conversation on the sales floor, and then after the call ended, like say, hey, great work on that one, or that was a tough one and you did a good job this way. So like I think that sort of when you're a manager of people or a director of sales, like you really are like motivating, keeping people's like motivated and feeling seen, and those sorts of like human to human psychology things can be um, enabled more by allowing more visibility into like good work that people are doing. Yeah, so that was like why I like thought Nooks was a good learning product, and everyone's like getting smarter while they're using that software. It's enabling that a higher performing organization.
Yeah, it's almost personalized mentorship because you get to see those best practices live and that managerial coaching. It's like a very interesting. This we just keep coming back to personalization and simulation almost
Yeah.
of a lot of different things, and so that's um, really sort of interesting. One thing I think that might relate to that's obviously in how you train for your existing craft, right? For whether it's code, whether it's sales, etc. AI is also probably going to cause a lot of like potentially reskilling.
Mm-hmm.
And have you seen any good examples of products that are helping less, essentially folks to explore completely novel new areas and get up to speed pretty quickly? Language learning is the most obvious, but are there examples? Otherwise, how do you think of AI's impact potentially on reskilling, particularly for coworkers that are having to pivot out of careers or change jobs, et cetera? Are there specific examples that come to mind there of good examples for reskilling
I mean, there's a
usage of
lot of
AI?
people entering like the health, like right now, healthcare, like frontline healthcare workers is like an area where there aren't enough workers, and there's a real like lack of clinicians, and there's a lot of like simulation training companies to upskill people on like therapy, like mental health, speech developments, like autism therapy, like helping people potentially become clinicians. I think the thing is like the AI enabled training with the avatar is we're in an interesting time because you have companies that are training people to do those jobs, but then you have the companies that are just training the bot to do the job too, and so they're kind of like both going at it at the same time.
Yeah.
And it's it'll be like the actual entity that delivers it, that delivers the service is going to determine to what extent they configure their labor to be what percent human versus what percent technology to achieve the same outcome. And so I think that like healthcare is one of the front lines of that right now.
That's really interesting. Yeah, synergy, right? Because they're trying to get the data and underlying annotation and interactions to train up stuff that'll eventually automate,
Or like if
your
you're a
job potentially.
radiologist, like at the
Exactly.
high end, right? You're like, okay, how much more accurate are these models going to be at showing like whether there's the presence of cancer um in an X-ray,
Yeah.
or a double, like right now I'm sure it's a double check, but it might become the predominant way, or like robots doing surgeries.
Yeah. Is there anything, we haven't seen yet that you kind of want to see more innovation, particularly around? It does feel like, you kind of said that this is water, everyone's sort of realizing, et
Mhm.
cetera. Is there a particular thing, though, you want to see more of this kind of broad technology begin to be applied to, as it relates to learning? Is there anything you yourself wish, more companies would be simulating, or a problem you wish people were going after?
Gosh, that's always like hard to do because it's almost like a counterfactual. It's like the non-known, it's the unknown unknown.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, I don't know. Like, I think one of the things you see in general is that people are like, so previously, before I started Avalanche, I co-founded and ran a government technology consulting firm, and we scaled to like 300 people. They're still like, you know going off in the world doing what they do today. Getting people to upgrade themselves on technology for people who are not technologists is really, really hard.
Mhm.
Like, I was trying to help some of the people on our team. So I founded a product division within the organization that would do, like basically we're doing data accountability and implementations. And it was just like almost impossible to get consultants to like upgrade themselves on the use of technology and tools. It's like hard to get an old dog to learn new tricks. And I was just trying to move people from like Google spreadsheets to like Airtable, because I was like, Airtable is a way more powerful tool for us to use, and it can be more like internet facing and people can interact with it. But if people are not have not seen it before, and they're not in the water, and then it's very scary, and they create antibodies very fast. And so I think that's actually like one of the biggest like impediments to AI being transformational in the workforce, is that fear, and like people's like digging in their heels and not wanting to learn, and yeah. and,
Eh,
and then also like people just don't really know. Like, I mean, I talk to people with kids that are coming out of college, and everyone's like, so like what jobs are they going to have? And I was like, I don't know. Like, nobody knows. No one knows.
yeah, it doesn't help that AI itself is one of the new technologies. So you're kind of asking,
Yeah.
hey, can you learn this new technology from this even newer technology? And I
Yeah.
think that kind of compounds itself. And I think that's so true. It's just kind of, I mean, maybe not the fear is the wrong word. It's just that it's that inherentness to say, well, I already know how to do this. Why are we doing? I mean, it's like all my friends who have kids now, and it's like, that's not how I learned how to do multiplication. It was a small example, but it's that kind of
Yeah.
like, oh, we've moved on apparently, and I guess no one told me. And I think a lot of it comes back to, why are you here? Why are you learning this? Is someone forcing you to learn this, or were you curious enough to be here? And I think a lot of
Mhm.
that comes down to what you said it perfectly, that psychological component, as to why do I have to learn this? Who am I learning this from? And what if I just don't get it? Like, what happens after that? And I think, and AI can't really solve all those problems. And frankly, humans can't really solve all those problems to a degree. And I think you summed it up really, really great there.
Oh, thanks.
I think it's interesting, the just this conversation, the arc of it is that the form factors have become even more powerful. There's more and more tools available, for personalized learning to accelerate your track, but the core understanding and problem of motivation is still there, right? Of
Mhm.
when it extends beyond the kind of context window or screen, um, that's an evergreen problem, right? It does feel as if once you are motivated to learn, it's not just Salman Khan or Khan Academy or a particular curriculum or influencer or YouTube. It's this actual simulation and nudges, et cetera, that really accelerate you. But that cold start problem is almost sort of an evergreen societal problem in education. How do we raise, like Sinan said, if there's a bunch of new AI technologies and a lot of uncertainty. I think even Sam Altman said this in an interview, right? Like, what do you want to raise? You want to kind of encourage traits of curiosity in particular, versus maybe, a specific, skill or craft. So I really think that's, an interesting sort of thing. And I'm not sure if anyone's working on the motivation aspect, et cetera, stuff like that. But it feels like the more things change, certain things stay the same.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's like a barbell of, well, people be doing more analog things to purely analog, right? Like sports and like caretaking of young children and just like spending potentially more time in like live experiences with family, that really like human elements, and like people shouldn't like run away from it. It's like, I feel like we're kind of in that like shitty transition time between like the old world and the new world, and that's why we have that like loneliness spike. Like I don't know if you've seen all that data, but it's like people are spending more time alone ever before. And like the answer is not like, okay, now you get an AI friend. It's like
I hope not. Please, that can't be the answer.
No. Yeah, that's not the future that we all want. I think people want time, like in-person time with their friends and their kids and their families, and technology should be an enabler of that.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Katelyn, for taking the time.
Of course.
Really appreciate it. And this was fun. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.